Fox News alert just moments ago. CBS News confirming they have fired award-winning veteran journalist Charlie Rose after stunning allegations of sexual misconduct. CBS calling the alleged behavior, quote, extremely disturbing and intolerable. This as new allegations are also rocking Capitol Hill. This is Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Melissa Francis in for Harris Faulkner. BuzzFeed reporting that Democrat John Conyers, the dean of the House of Representatives, settled a lawsuit in 2015 from a staffer who alleges that she was fired for rejecting his sexual advances. In the meantime, a female lawmaker says former Democratic Congressman Bob Filner groped her in an elevator. All this as Republican Senate candidate Roy Moore is still trying to discredit his accusers in a closely watched race down in Alabama. Peter Ducey joins us live from our Washington bureau with the latest. Peter, I'm afraid this is a lot to keep track of.
And Melissa, that suspension for Charlie Rose lasted less than 24 hours. He has now been fired by CBS, where President David Rhodes says in part, quote, I've often heard that things used to be different and no one may be able to correct the past, but what may have once been accepted should not ever have been acceptable. Now, over on Capitol Hill, the Office of Compliance there says they've been receiving a very high volume of requests about settlements paid out to staffers, so they released the big number, 17 million taxpayer dollars over 20 years for sexual harassment and other workplace grievances. And for now, all the members of Congress accused of wrongdoing remain anonymous.
I was surprised to hear there was a hush money fund, if you will, and I hope that comes to an end today. If there's been bad behavior, it should be dealt with by the individuals that have exercised poor judgment and bad behavior and have conducted themselves in an inappropriate or illegal manner.
Right now, former Speaker of the House John Boehner and current House Speaker Paul Ryan are denying knowing anything about the sexual harassment settlement allegedly paid by Democratic Congressman John Conyers, laid out in a BuzzFeed article. And just a few minutes ago, we got new word from Conyers. He says, and this is a quote, my office resolved the allegations with an express denial of liability in order to save all involved from the rigors of protracted litigation. This should not be lost in the narrative. The resolution was not for millions of dollars, but rather for an amount that equated to a reasonable severance payment. And that comes as Democrats outside the Capitol are starting to push for transparency.
This is not a Republican problem or a Democratic problem. This is a persistent problem in the workplace, and we need to ensure that women as well as men feel protected when they're at work.
The Democratic Congresswoman Diana DeGette is now accusing a former Democratic Congressman Bob Filner of trying to kiss her in an elevator while both were on Capitol Hill. And the Alabama Senate Republican hopeful Judge Roy Moore still is not giving any credence to any of his accusers. Instead, he's accusing the liberal media of spotlighting unproven accusations against him to help the Democratic candidate Doug Jones. Melissa.
All right, thank you so much. Meantime, Democratic House Leader Nancy Pelosi says she did not know that Conyers reportedly settled a sexual harassment claim with taxpayer dollars due to a secret mechanism in Congress that allows such things to remain hush-hush. Pelosi adding that she hopes to fix the practice, saying, quote, the current process includes the signing of non-disclosure agreements by the parties involved. Congresswoman Jackie Speier has introduced legislation that will provide much-needed transparency on these agreements and make other critical reforms. For more, let's bring in Republican Congressman of New York, Peter King. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. Is it really true that you guys don't know about this, that you didn't know there was a fund set up in order to pay off people who made claims like this?
Yeah, I had absolutely no idea. I guess it came out late last week is the first I ever heard of it. And I've never heard it discussed. I didn't even know it existed. And I would just say that if there are going to be reforms going forward, and there should be, I think that everything should be disclosed, but that the person bringing the charges would have the option to keep it confidential if they wanted to protect their privacy. That should be at the option of the person filing the complaints.
But you guys are the ones that make the laws. How could you not know about what was lawfully going on and being paid out on your behalf of our dollars?
I have no idea. I've been in Congress 25 years. I've never heard of it, and I don't know if anyone else who's ever discussed it. I heard Marsha Blackburn talking about it before. Again, it was not known to her either. And again, I don't know if this is a law. This is handled internally, I guess. I don't think there's any statute that provides it. It's probably just put in the same category as any lawsuit against the federal government. But again, this has now been opened up and it has to be looked into fully, and every protection should be given.
Do you think that all disclosures from the past should be made, that even though that there was a non-disclosure agreement signed, that we should know of every dollar that was being paid out and on whose behalf?
You know, that to me is a legal question, that if it was a lawful non-disclosure agreement, if that's the basis on which it was entered into, I think it's hard to undo that. And that's, again, that's a legal issue, and would have to be determined that way. But certainly going forward, I think that it should be up to the person filing the complaint if they do reach a settlement, whether or not that should be made public or whether it should be kept confidential.
Absolutely. Sir, I want to ask you to stand by for a second, because at this moment there are, in fact, 2 turkeys being pardoned at the White House, no pun intended. We can listen in for a second here.
Great occasion by Carl Wittenberg, chairman of the National Turkey Federation, along with his wife Charlene and sons Nate and Wyatt. It was 70 years ago that the National Turkey Federation first presented the National Thanksgiving Turkey to President Harry Truman, who, I might add, did not grant the pardon. He refused. He was a tough cookie. Today, I'm going to be a much nicer president. Over the past 10 months, Melania and I have had the pleasure of welcoming many, many special visitors to the great White House. We've hosted dozens of incredible world leaders, members of Congress, and along the way, a few very strange birds. But we have yet to receive any visitors quite like our magnificent guest of honor today, Drumstick. Hi, Drumstick. Oh, Drumstick, I think, is going to be very happy. I'm pleased to report that unlike millions of other turkeys at this time of the year, Drumstick has a very, very bright future ahead of him. Drumstick was raised on Carl and Charlene's turkey farm in Douglas County, Minnesota, with the help of 5 young women from the Douglas County 4-H chapter who are here with us today. And I want to say great work. Where are they? Please stand. Great job you've done. 4-H. That's great. Thank you. Upon being pardoned, Drumstick and his friend Wishbone will live out their days at Gobbler's Rest. Beautiful place. It's custom built. It's an enclosure on the campus of Virginia Tech. Tremendous school. There they'll join Tater and Tot, the 2 turkeys pardoned last year by President Obama. As many of you know, I have been very active in overturning a number of executive actions by my predecessor. However, I have been informed by the White House counsel's office that Tater and Tot's pardons cannot, under any circumstances, be revoked. So we're not going to revoke them. So Tater and Tot, you can rest easy. I'd also like to thank the National Turkey Federation for bringing along 2 other turkeys from Jandal's Turkey Farm in Orfield, Pennsylvania, the great state of Pennsylvania. We're donating these turkeys to Martha's Table, a truly fantastic charity right here in Washington, D.C., which provides warm meals to people in need. They do a fantastic job. Before we get to the pardon, I would like to take a moment to extend our very heartfelt special message. Thanks, folks, to the finest and bravest people in the entire world, our great men and women in uniform, the military, law enforcement, first responders. These are incredible people, so thank you. Many of you are always, and you know your loved ones, and you're far away, and you spend so much time away. This Thanksgiving, I want each of you to know that we're forever grateful for the incredible job and for the incredible sacrifices that you and your families make in defense of our nation, our freedom, and our truly great American flag. I'd also like to express my thanks to the wonderful citizens of our country, the people who care for our communities, raise America's children, uphold our laws and our values, and make this amazing land into our national home. As we gather together with our families on Thanksgiving and give thanks for our many blessings, we are reminded of the national family to which we all belong as citizens of this incredible country. This Thursday, as we give thanks for our cherished loved ones, let us also renew our bonds of trust, loyalty, and affection between our fellow citizens as members of a proud national family of Americans. And now I think Drumstick and Wishbone would be very thankful if we would just get around to the pardon. They say, enough talk, please pardon us. So I want to thank everybody for being here today and wish everybody a very, very happy Thanksgiving. Very special people, a very special country. Thank you very much. Thank you. Wow. Wow. That's a big bird. How heavy is that bird?
36 pounds.
36 pounds. It's a big bird. You'll have to touch it. Wow. I feel so good about myself, Tony. Are you ready, Drumstick? Okay. Drumstick, you are hereby pardoned. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Come on up. Come on up here. Come on, Foray.
Well, they're taking photos now. That is Drumstick officially getting pardoned there. His wingman along for the ride, Wishbone, was also pardoned. The turkeys arrived yesterday afternoon. They were staying on the 4th floor at the Willard Hotel. Apparently, turkeys like the cold, but these wanted to stay inside before their big show. Anyway, in the midst of all that is serious in this world right now, it is nice to take a little break and do something related to the holiday there. Pardon me. Let's bring in Chris Steyerwalt, Fox News political editor and the editor of the Halftime Report. Chris, did you know the criteria for pardoning these turkeys? They have been chosen based on their showmanship, character. Do they have a good temperament, strut? Do their fan feather out, pitch, gait, which is how they're balanced, and good posture? Boy.
We could use some of that, I think, in Congress.
Yes.
I think if we were just apply those same standards, maybe less strut, to members of Congress, we would be in a much. I liked how this is Drumstick there that got the pardon. I like Drumstick remained perfectly still afterwards for fear maybe that something was going to change. Trump would turn and go, actually off with his head.
Yeah, you're fired.
He was holding tight.
And, you know, returning to the news of the day, because it seems appropriate, there are some that would like to swap places with that turkey and get a pardon. Most recently, we see Charlie Rose not getting a pardon. But actually, you know, basically 24 hours after the whole story comes out, CBS saying that they are canceling his contract. What's your take?
Well, this doesn't have anything to do with you and me, but we know that when a large media organization faces the reality of notable people in positions of power dealing with these kinds of allegations, swift action is helpful. But also we know that it takes time. You know, the effort that you have to put in terms of compliance and accountability and investigation and all of that stuff, this is going to be a tough experience for the people at CBS. And so, you know, my prayers, my support for everybody over there as they're trying to deal with this. From the other side, we can say, you know, this isn't an easy thing to go through.
Yeah. And, you know, moving on, as all this goes against the backdrop of, you know, we have a couple political races coming up, the political tone in this country. We were just talking to Congressman Peter King about the money that was paid out, our taxpayer dollars, your money, my money, our viewers' money, that was paid out to victims on Capitol Hill. And you just wonder who's responsible for that? I mean, how is it possible that Nancy Pelosi says she had no idea this fund existed? You just heard, Congressman King say that he had no idea this fund existed. How is that possible?
Well, because it was designed to be secret. That's what it was there for. It was designed to make sure that these kinds of accusations were handled not swiftly, they were handled slowly, and then kept secret. Look, you asked exactly the right question of Congressman King, which is, how about these non-disclosure agreements going backwards? Yeah. Yes, everybody agrees going forward, this is not the appropriate thing to do when it comes to the expenditure of public funds, but the backward question, there is enough here. You look at both parties right now. You've got the Republicans and the Democrats are both taking an absolute beating over this question. Yeah. Roy Moore and Al Franken, Conyers now with this stuff. As Bob Dylan said, a hard rain is going to fall. Now, if you open up and go backwards, can you imagine what all sort of creepy ghoulies might be lurking down there inside these NDAs when congressmen were in a different era?
No, and it's not fair to go back. If somebody signed a non-disclosure, they should abide by it. At the same time, there's something maybe politically smart, and no matter what industry you're in, about throwing it out there right now, because everyone is in the spotlight, and it sort of seems like this may be the safest time to air your dirty laundry. Perhaps as a society, we turn the page, we turn to a better day when people stop this behavior, but owning up to it seems smart at this point, or do you disagree?
Unless you think cynically that you can get advantage over a particular political rival, or that you think that your party will be more helped or more hurt in the given moment. And that's always what happens with these things, the weaponization of these accusations. The real interest here ought to be, and this is none of my business to say, but the real interest here ought to be making sure that behaviors are improved and that standards are better and that we come to terms with a fully equal workforce. But what always happens is these things are turned into political weapons, and we saw the White House using the Al Franken allegations to try to say that it's okay for Roy Moore to stay in the race, even though these things...
But it doesn't work.
It never works.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And as it comes out now, I don't know, no one's getting a pass at this point, in my humble opinion. I think women have their eyes wide open, and it does feel like a new time. But we'll see. Chris Stirewalt, always brilliant. We appreciate your time.
You bet.
So her death at the hands of an illegal immigrant deported several times put a spotlight on sanctuary cities. Now, as Kate Steinle's family waits to see if justice will be served, a federal judge slapping down President Trump's executive order to block funding to cities that do not follow immigration laws. But are there other legal options?
If he's saying that Congress has not given the president the proper authorization, guess what? The reauthorization for all the funding of the federal government moving forward has to happen by December 8th. One or two sentences placed into that funding bill, which will pass, will solve this problem, give the president the authority.
Fox News alert, jurors set to begin deliberating in the Kate Steinle murder trial today, a case that sparked national debate over sanctuary cities. In 2015, she was shot in San Francisco by an illegal immigrant who had been deported 5 times. But yesterday, a federal judge blocked President Trump's attempt to cut funding for cities that refuse to enforce federal immigration law. The White House vowing to fight this decision, saying, quote, "The flawed district court ruling undercuts the president's efforts to keep the American people safe and secure by enforcing existing law. We are confident the courts will ultimately uphold the president's lawful and necessary authority." Let's bring in Doug Burns, a former federal prosecutor. Let's talk about that ruling first.
Sure.
What's your take?
Well, it's interesting. It's analogous to the travel ban case, and I'll tell you why. Because the court isn't saying you can never cut any funding whatsoever to a sanctuary city. What they're saying is, A, you can't cut monies that have already been approved. Okay, that's number one. And then B, you can't cut monies that are not reasonably related to immigration. So, for example, you can't cut funding for a hospital saying you didn't comply with our immigration policy, so therefore the hospital funding. So basically,
does that legal argument hold up in your opinion?
Yeah, the point is that the order itself is very, very broad. So that if they turned around and said to the extent that the budget governs assistance to federal law enforcement, we are withholding funds. In my opinion, that'd be upheld in 5 minutes in a court.
But we sort of go through this every time. I mean, you talked about how much it is like the travel ban, and they sort of issue an opinion, and then it seems like you can go back and fix it based on that opinion, and they'll just come up with another reading of the law that then says in a different way, well, okay, so you satisfied that, but you didn't satisfy this.
It's an excellent point, and the reason it's such a good point you're making is the opinion really is steeped in separation of powers, and it's saying that basically the different branches have different functions. The executive branch is not involved with the purse strings, Congress is, but there are situations when they can. So to your point, it is like cat and mouse. It's like, it's too broad, so now we're going to go back and fix it, and it goes back and forth. Now, having said that, I think I heard you say on the air, and you're so right, that the Ninth Circuit is a very liberal court, probably the most liberal in the country. So the point is this case may very well end up in the Supreme Court of the United States, and I think that the Trump administration will have a good shot there. But again, the case to me, as a lawyer, is fact-specific. It's about what funding, in this case, Santa Clara, San Francisco, are you talking about, not some blanket rule, Melissa.
So based on what's happened so far, would you go back and rewrite it and try again on the president's side, or would you just appeal and keep going to a higher court?
That's a hard thing to answer. I suppose I might want to recraft it. Why not? As opposed to just confidently saying we're definitely going to win on appeal. I mean, I look into my crystal ball. I don't think they're going to win in the Ninth Circuit, but as I just said, I think they'll do well in the Supreme Court.
Yeah. So they expect the case, Kate Steinle's case, to come back this afternoon.
Yes.
Does it hinge on this idea that he picked up a T-shirt that he didn't know contained a gun, and it somehow accidentally went off? Because that seems like a tough story to believe. Does his defense hinge on that?
It's very interesting because the argument that the defense is making is, wait a minute, there's no evidence whatsoever that he intended to specifically shoot her if you look at all of the circumstances. And there is some validity to that. The problem, as a veteran trial lawyer, 32 years, is the rafters are poisoned on large measure with the fact that he was, they say that it hasn't come into the record that he was deported multiple times and what his immigration status is. But the fact is, jurors are human beings, and to the extent that they know that, it could unfortunately color the decision. But to your question,
the immigration element would color it, because it feels like it's the, this beautiful innocent woman who was walking along and was shot by somebody, for whatever reason.
If you're sitting there, here's my point, recrystallize it. If you're sitting there, defendant A is basically a nice citizen. Defendant B has been deported 5 times and re-entered the U.S. and then killed somebody. Let me be crystal clear, as they say, I'm not supporting that should be relevant on any level. However, people are human beings, and you never know.
Interesting. All right. So so in the end, you think guilty?
It's hard for me to predict. I didn't follow the case that closely. I think, from what I read, there seemed to be some mitigation on the defense side of the case, just on the facts of the case, that it was somewhat accidental.
Yeah. Wow. All right, Doug Burns, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Big news for the Republican Party as it regroups after stinging losses in elections earlier this month. We will tell you what has the party hopeful and why Democrats are going back to the drawing board less than a year before midterms. Another blockbuster month of fundraising for the Republican National Committee, more than a year after President Trump's historic election and less than a year ahead of the 2018 midterms. Check these numbers out. The RNC raking in $9 million in October alone. Compare that to the DNC, which raised $4 million. Over the year to date, the RNC more than doubled DNC fundraising, and they have less debt. Callie McEnany is a spokesperson for the RNC, and she joins us now. That's a lot of money, but at the same time, if you look at some of the polling, I'm looking at Quinnipiac, November 7th through the 13th, asking if the election were today, would you want to see the Republican Party or the Democratic Party win control of the House of Representatives? 38% said Republican Party, 51% said Democrat Party. So you may have more money, but it doesn't seem like the sentiment is necessarily there. How do you respond to that?
Well, if we believed in state polling, for instance, then Hillary Clinton would be president, not Donald Trump. We believe in the hidden Trump voter that doesn't want to talk to a pollster, that doesn't want to talk to someone who belongs to an institution, but who supports President Trump and his agenda. And for proof of that, you look at
Yeah, they may support President Trump, absolutely. But this is about Congress. And a lot of people who love the president think that D.C. is the swamp, whether they're Republicans or Democrats.
That's right, and that's understandable. But when Congress passes tax cuts and the Jobs Act, which we believe that they will, it's already encouraging. It's through the House, it's through the Senate Finance Committee, and it's well on its way to passing in the Senate and going to conference. When that happens and people have more money in their pockets, they're going to look at Congress and look at President Trump and see the two together as an unstoppable force. Meanwhile, you look at the Democratic Party, it's the party of negativity and corruption. Negativity and corruption does not win elections.
And you said that essential thing is that they have to get the job done and they have to get tax reform done, because we saw they got swept in this month's elections. You know, when you're looking at Virginia or you're looking at New Jersey, and they are likely at this point, Republicans, to possibly give away that seat in Alabama, maybe for other reasons. But, you know, it certainly looks like there are a few challenges in the near term.
And those states that you referenced, New Jersey and Virginia, those are blue states. So it's understandable that Democrats are going to win solid blue states. But look at the other side of the coin. Republicans won in Missouri. We won in Kansas. We won in South Carolina. We won in Georgia, where the Democratic Party poured $31 million into one race. And they were trounced. And they were trounced because all they are an agendaless, leaderless party of negativity. Negativity doesn't win. The positive Trump agenda does win.
Meanwhile, I mean, to get back to the fundraising numbers, so the Democratic Party fired their top fundraiser on Thursday, just 5 months into the job. I wonder if those numbers, is that a reflection on the Clinton money machine, which has always been able to raise money and rake in money for the DNC? Does it have to do with maybe what's going on in Hollywood? And the distraction over harassment and everything else has taken everyone away from funding the Democrats? I mean, what do you think? Do any of those things ring true to you?
I think it's, yes, all of those things, certainly. But at the core of this, I think it's a fundamental distrust of the Democratic Party apparatus. This was a party that, instead of uplifting the will of voters, instead said, we don't care what you have to say. We care about propping up Hillary Clinton artificially at the expense of Bernie Sanders. Voters rightfully do not trust the Democratic Party because it has been used as a vehicle for selfish self-promotion and not one to uplift the will of voters.
Yeah. Has all of the stories and all of the allegations that have been going on with Roy Moore, has that had an impact on fundraising within the RNC?
It hasn't. And as you know, the RNC, we pulled our joint fundraising agreement with Roy Moore. We stand with women. We are the party of women, unlike the Democratic Party, who for years, if not decades, has covered a lot of these allegations against Bill Clinton. The RNC took an undeniable stance on the side of women, and it was a stance that was supported by President Trump.
So it's interesting because there's a real opportunity there, because folks out in the public, I think, smell the hypocrisy of saying on the Democratic side that you are the party of women, and then we've seen a whole bunch of lawmakers come out and be accused of various things. Still, a lot of Republicans stand accused as well. So how do you capitalize on this when it seems to be going on everywhere?
It does. It seems to be going on everywhere, but we've taken a forceful stance and we've said this is unacceptable. It's not something that's welcome in our party. At the same time, this is we're not judge and jury here at the Republican Party. It's for the voters of Alabama to decide. But we've pulled our funding, we've pulled our resources when we saw those inconsistencies, because that's where we stand. We stand with women. These allegations are inexcusable in every form they're coming in against many, many powerful figures. And we need to take a powerful stand against this on the side of women everywhere, all across this country.
Do you think you're able to walk that fine line? Because there's been a lot of pushback, and we certainly saw it at the White House press conference yesterday, saying, you know, by just saying, we're not publicly backing Roy Moore and we're not sending him money, but at the same time we respect voters in Alabama. Some feel like that isn't a strong enough stand for women. Do you think you can really walk the line that finely?
I think President Trump and the RNC together have taken a very consistent stance. We've encouraged Roy Moore to step down if these allegations are at all true. President Trump has supported pulling all of the funding from that race. But at the same time, it's for Alabamians to decide their future. It's for the voters of Alabama to decide what they want, who they want to serve in office. It's not for us to decide. But that being said, we're certainly not going to put fundraising dollars into this.
Yeah, I mean, ironically, if the establishment stood up and said, you know, he should get out, it would probably help him based on his brand. That's just my guess. The fact that he is anti-establishment himself, Roy Moore, that's his brand. It would be interesting to see. But in any case, thank you for coming on today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Melissa.
Just hours after President Trump encouraged Republicans to get a tax bill to his desk by the end of the year, new analysis gives us a better idea of what you may be paying Uncle Sam. We are going to break it down. And CBS says it has now fired Charlie Rose in the wake of sexual misconduct allegations. The power panel weighs in on what some call a systemic crisis in U.S. institutions.
Women cannot achieve equality in the workplace or in society until there is a reckoning.
When you have
a stunning turn of events for a legendary newsman. CBS firing Charlie Rose less than 24 hours after the Washington Post published the accounts of 8 women who accused Rose of sexual harassment, which included nudity, groping, lewd phone calls, all kinds of really creepy stuff. Earlier today, Rose's female co-hosts on CBS morning flagship show tackled the controversy head-on, saying they feel angry and betrayed.
This is a moment that demands a frank and honest assessment about where we stand and, more generally, the safety of women. Let me be very clear. There is no excuse for this alleged behavior.
I've enjoyed a friendship and a partnership with Charlie for the past 5 years. I've held him in such high regard, and I'm really struggling because what do you say when someone that you deeply care about has done something that is so horrible?
The Charlie Rose controversy exploding the same day the New York Times suspended star political reporter Glenn Thrush for an apparent pattern of hitting on young female colleagues. Time for our power panel. Former Republican Congressman and chair of the Oversight Committee, Jason Chaffetz, and back from Outnumbered couch, former State Department spokesperson Marie Harf. Both are Fox News contributors. We're also getting word right now that Charlie Rose has also been fired from PBS. And we were talking in the break about people around him who knew about this. And do we have to ask the tough questions? I mean, in some of the articles, in the longer expose articles, they talked about the executive producer who had, you know, the victims who came forward claim that they told her, and they disclosed details of their conversations with her. And you wonder how many people around him knew this was going on, and why didn't they say anything? And do people who stay quiet bear part of the blame, or are they afraid? Are these the questions we need to ask? I'm not passing judgment on anybody.
Absolutely.
I'm just wondering, as we go forward and try to do better, does this need to be part of the discussion?
Absolutely. And you're right. We are in a moment where we feel like we have all these questions we need to ask, and there aren't a lot of simple answers, right? Charlie Rose shouldn't have done what he did. He should get fired. That's a simple answer. What about his female executive producer? Exactly what you said. Had multiple young women come to her,
alleged, yes,
allegedly,
right,
in this article, and complain. So when we look as a culture going forward about how we prevent it and how we punish men who do that, all of this has to be part of the conversation, and this is just the beginning. I have a feeling, and when you look at Congress, when you look at the media, I have a feeling a lot of men, particularly powerful men in places like the United States Congress, are nervous right now about the next shoe to drop.
Absolutely. And for that executive producer, you could easily say that she was afraid that she would lose her job and she would never work again. That's probably a fair comment. We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know what that was about, but it certainly is. It's worth part of the discussion. We're also talking about D.C. right now in this fund, fund for people who have, filed claims against congressmen, and the fact that now Nancy Pelosi said she didn't know anything about it. We just had Congressman King on saying he didn't know it. Had you ever heard of this?
No. And first of all, I want to say that I think CBS, Nora O'Donnell, and Gayle King actually did an admirable job in a very difficult situation. As it relates to Congress, this is pretty disgusting, right? Why should the people in Oklahoma have to pull out money from their wallets to pay off if a member of Congress did something that might be illegal? And I guess what I would want to say to anybody who's working on Capitol Hill, if there's sexual assault, that's against the law. Call in law enforcement.
Right.
There's that. And I can tell you, as the chairman of the Oversight Committee, we had hearing after hearing after hearing after hearing about government employees engaged in this type of behavior. And you had at least 2 cabinet secretaries who testified to us, we can't fire these federal employees. So I'm glad at the macro level that we're having this national discussion and that we're saying universally it's not acceptable and you do need to pay a consequence.
That's right. I think that one thing we've learned, and since so much of it started here at Fox as well, is that at the time I said, this is everywhere.
Correct.
This is everywhere. And any institution that sits there and is passing judgment on another one, just wait, because it's coming your way. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
It's a bipartisan problem.
Yep.
You're exactly right. This is not a Democratic problem,
Nope.
a conservative problem, Republican problem, liberal problem. It crosses comedy and Hollywood and the media and politics and probably sports at some point.
Absolutely.
Right? We haven't heard a lot about that yet. Anyone who claims this is a partisan issue is avoiding digging into the really difficult cultural problems. Most people, I think, actually are taking a look at this from a cultural perspective and saying, what can all of us do better, regardless of party?
Can I ask you real quick?
Sure.
Do you feel like this is a witch hunt? I mean, a lot of men out there are worried that even if they didn't do anything, that women are going to come after them. Is that a fear that you hear from other men? Do you feel that yourself?
Well, I do think it is mostly a gender issue. I mean, it does happen against men as well, but I got to tell you, if you are not acting appropriately in the right setting, you should pay a consequence. I fear, though, that there will be some people that will want to take advantage and throw an allegation.
Yeah.
And then how do you get your reputation back? And so we got to be very
question.
careful and make sure that it's well documented. And you're going to have people say, hey, it's not true.
Very valid. All right, thank you. We're going to have much more with our panel, including the latest on the Republican tax reform plans, a new analysis of how much you'll likely pay and what senators may decide the bill's fate. New analysis now of Republicans' tax reform plans. It found that the House's plan passed last week would boost economic growth a little less than 1% in 2018 and generate an additional $169 billion in tax revenue, though it would also add more than $1 trillion to the deficit in a decade. On the Senate plan, the analysis found it would reduce taxes on average for all income groups in 2019 and 2025. 9% of taxpayers would pay higher taxes in 2019, but that number would rise to 50% in 2027. We're back now with our power panel, Jason Chaffetz and Marie Harf. All right, I have problems with that math, having studied economics myself, because it's static analysis where they don't count for the growth in the economy. We have no idea how much the economy would grow. So with that caveat in there, what do you think?
Well, I think there's a couple of challenges here. First, the Senate just has a math problem in terms of counting votes. So forget about the economic math. The Senate may not actually pass this, and a number of senators that are either no's or on the fence have different issues. You can't fix them all with one.
Right.
But I think most concerningly are the numbers about what will happen to the middle class. That by the end of a decade, this analysis says they will actually be paying more in taxes. Mm-hmm. That's a tough political leg to stand on. I also think it's not great policy because this tax reform was supposed to be designed primarily to help the middle class. That's what Donald Trump said. That's what he ran on. Mm-hmm. This is by no means a done deal.
Okay, so you could correct that problem. The reason why this goes up like this in 2025 is because a lot of the cuts in there expire. They sunset. So could you make them permanent?
Yes, look, the Senate created that problem for themselves. That's why I think that the House bill is actually...
They do create a lot of problems for themselves over there. It's so frustrating.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I would really want the Senate to vote on the House bill because you don't have those same problems. And it did pass the House. Mm-hmm. They're one vote away from sending that bill to the president's desk, and there's no good reason why they wouldn't do that.
But why don't they do it? Is it because it has no hope of passing?
I don't know. And look, I was in the body. I was a chairman of the committee. Look, the Senate always thinks that whatever the House does is dead on arrival, and it's wrong. And by the way, as it relates to deficits, you shouldn't have to, quote unquote, justify allowing the American people to keep their own money in their own wallet.
You should cut spending.
You should cut spending, exactly. And what I am absolutely just appalled by the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans, they passed a $47 trillion budget, 10-year budget, with no cuts in spending. If you want to attack the deficit, you do it by cutting spending.
Okay, so politically, why didn't they do that? We all agreed that that would have been a great solution, but instead they passed this budget first. They said they had to do that to get to tax reform. They're always claiming there are rules out there that are tying their hands, even though they're the ones that make the rules. Right. Why do you think they didn't lower that budget? They didn't have enough votes for that?
I think that a lot of these members get into office and the spending helps their constituents. And none of them are willing to make a tough political decision to actually look at what spending to cut, let alone even look at entitlement reform, right? Which is a whole other ball of wax.
Yeah, is that true? Real quick.
Yeah,
true?
That's about 75% of the budget is in
No,
Medicaid,
are they gutless on cutting spending? Because you would know you were there.
Period. You don't even have to have the qualifier of spending.
Whoa, throwing them right under the bus. All right, thanks to both of you. We'll be right back.